welcome to the Anti-Corruption Crusader podcast. This is the inaugural program or first episode where we interview experts and distinguished professionals in the area of ethics, good governance, and anti-corruption. My goal or my hope is that we can learn more about their personal journey as well as how they use techniques or knowledge to fight corruption. And we hope that the listeners in this program would be inspired to do the same because corruption is a big problem everywhere in most countries, and we need a lot of help. My first guest is Cynthia Gabriel. She's a key advocate in human rights, anti-corruption, and good governance in Southeast Asia as well as globally. I'm honored to have Cynthia as my guest today, and I'm sure that if Marvel has an anti-corruption superhero, Cynthia would be one of the superhero. Just listen to this. Cynthia co-founded the Asia Forum for Human Rights and Development, or Forum Asia. She was the vice president of International Federation of Human Rights. She's one of the 5 distinguished award recipients from the National Endowment Fund for Democracy. That is the 2017 Democracy Award. She founded the C4, the Center to Combat Corruption and Anachronism, and is currently their board of directors. She's also the vice president of the International UNCAC. She was also appointed the prestigious Global Future Council of the World Economic Forum. And more recently, she received the award by the King of Malaysia for her outstanding efforts in fighting corruption. And in 2022, she was named by the US State Department as one of their anti-corruption champion. Cynthia is also a city councilor, and she has a degree in analytical chemistry and jurisprudence and law. Wow, that is a long resume. So welcome,
Very
Cynthia.
long. Thank you so much, Pana.
And we've been good friends and we crossed paths a couple of times. The first question I want to ask you is that if you look back at how you started in this field of anti-corruption and human rights, what inspired you to start on this journey? Was it a single thing or a number of events that led you to this work?
Well, thank you so much, Pana, for having me. The topic of the podcast was something that I couldn't resist saying no to. It was really very exciting to actually talk about anti-corruption crusading work because it probably is one of the most difficult subjects to address in a country that is in a democratic transition and has been plagued with corruption at all levels. So it's almost like talking foreign language here because many people don't understand why we need to beat the whole corrupt system. So it was a big challenge, but it wasn't just the theory of it that got me excited. It was a couple of things. I think one very personal thing that I don't really talk about a lot is I probably am one of those persons that had a second chance in life because I almost drowned when I was much younger. And maybe as things come to be, it was just something that grew in me that there was a bigger purpose in life and there was more to just living like all my other friends, after graduation, work in the corporate sector, buy a car, buy a house, get married before 30 years old, and, have children before 35, make sure that they're all done with college before you reach 50 and stuff. So there was a pattern in life that many people were following. But I was more interested in everything that was not ordinary. And so that kind of got me a little bit more activated when I was in the university. Of course, I was studying a very difficult course. It was a course in almost in the engineering field of analyzing chemical engineering, but this was very focused on analyzing chemicals. And you had to be in the science lab like every day to actually get your results and stuff. So it was kind of boring and depressing to actually check into the lab every day. But at the same time, there were other activities that I was involved in, some social events and stuff that got me to befriend other people outside my university. And we started to do really very interesting stuff, you know. We volunteered for a consumer association group there and became very active interns to actually look at stuff. And one day they actually asked me if I could help with analyzing some polluted water. Of course, I was not supposed to bring anything to the science lab, but I did. I broke the law, but I realized that there were some poisonous material in there, and I was so happy that I contributed to some social cause. So all these things actually just added up when I grew up further. That yeah, I had drowned once. Maybe this was a second chance to make a difference, and that I could actually take something to the science lab and show results of what a community around there was actually struggling because there was a Japanese um, firm that was actually polluting the waters there and so on and so forth. But there was no grand plan to get involved in anything so big like anti-corruption. There was just seeds that were planted as I was growing up, that there was a whole lot more going on in society that I didn't know about. And so it really tickled my curiosity even more. And then things just developed, I guess.
Okay. So what was the first thing that after the analytical part for the water pollution, when was the actual formal role in the human rights and anti-corruption, if you recall?
Well, anti-corruption was a little bit later, but because some of my friends were involved in all this social justice, poverty issues and stuff, I used to follow them and learn a lot about social teachings and stuff. And when I actually graduated and started working in the private sector, it was something that it's hard to describe. I mean, it's not like it was all bad. It was interesting and it was okay, but there was something else that was pulling me to look at how people were actually at the center of a lot of the issues. And so maybe I could use my whatever I learned in the science field to help them and stuff. So I started to stray a little bit away from my work interests and got involved in a lot of issues. And maybe I should put the blame on some of my friends as well, because they started to actually have a bigger influence on me and said, okay, why don't you try working on human rights for a while, social justice issues and all that. So I thought, yeah, okay. I mean, maybe 1 year, maybe 6 months, but I think that really caused a lot of panic with my parents at that time, because at 22 or 23, I didn't really have a proper head on my shoulders. I just wanted to do what was interesting out there. And so that 1 year just ended up being many years of immersing myself and getting more and more involved. And, just one thing I realized along the way, that at the heart of a lot of human rights issues was actually a corrupt system. And that really took me off on another field, because corruption was actually about public money that was being stolen and wasted. And in order to find out how it got stolen, who stole it, where is it hidden, etc., it takes you on another line of being more curious and investigative and and all that. And then when you actually get all your electronic gadgets and your handphone and stuff, you start doing calculation, taking pictures and all that. And then I think that that voice was something that was unusual in society. Talking about it was different. And so I would say it was more about being infamous than famous, and getting into trouble was something that I wasn't too afraid of somehow. Um, and some of my friends used to tell me that I'm crazy. Why am I doing all these things? But I didn't think it was anything so major anyway when it was going on, and it just evolved along the way. But there were a few turning points, I think, that made me realize why it was so important and why I needed to keep it up.
I
Should I
see.
say it now?
Well, I mean, sure. Yeah,
Well, one of it was because we were already quite in the human rights community, we were already quite established in terms of connections and contacts abroad and stuff. So we knew a lot of advocates and lawyers working on public interest cases and stuff. So there were a couple of things brewing here, and some lawyers from Europe actually started to discuss with us that it would be very interesting to look at cross-border cases. And they were actually working on a defense procurement case with a French shipbuilding company in developing countries like Taiwan, Pakistan, and so on. And it is the same shipbuilding company that was selling um, refurbished goods for normal price to Malaysia. And the whole sensational thing about this defense procurement was it wasn't just about national security reasons that were making it so secret, but it was also about the defense minister at the time, which was then later our prime minister, who was involved in an even bigger scandal called 1MDB. But at that time, the scandal was so big because there was also a Mongolian translator who was killed in the midst of the whole negotiations. And she was killed in a very really horrible way. She was actually bombed with a C4 explosive. And so the French lawyers said that it would be, they're compiling cases of this shipbuilder and they wanted to include Malaysia and stuff. So the human rights organization decided collectively that, yeah, let's put our name in because it's such a out of this world possibility that the French will even pay attention to us because we're not part of the European Union. We don't have local standby. We don't have any jurisdiction, but we were just feeling a bit adventurous and naughty. So we filed an complaint with the tribunal. After 5 months, we got a letter from the French tribunal to say they are opening an investigations on this. And it's because France had just signed the OECD convention, and it was an anti-bribery convention that made sure their French officials would not partake in foreign bribes with their counterparts when doing business. So they were more interested on the French side. And we were like startled. It's like, oh my God, they actually paid attention to our complaint. And then they wrote to us a couple of times and they wanted as much information that we could give them and all that. The turning point in this long story was the police investigations were complete and the French lawyer actually showed us what was compiled. And the compilation was just absolutely shocking. It showed billions of ringgit being used as bribery and to actually solicit further contracts. And the abuse of power was amazing. So for that defense minister at that time, he actually negotiated for him to be present at one meeting, that he would be paid 1 billion euros just to be there. And And the details were like, it was worse than any possible Hollywood kind of movie, which was a thriller kind of thing. And we were like, oh my God, what do we do? So there were two choices. Either you turn away, don't do anything, or do something and get into trouble. But we talked to many people, many lawyers here, many members of parliament, and even tried to reach some of the companies that were involved in the negotiations. But on the Malaysian side, there was almost nothing that was going on. Even the MECC was too afraid to open up an investigation paper and stuff because it involved very high power. And then after that, the rest of the story is online, because we were kind of like naive enough to think that it was the right thing to do, to actually talk about it and expose it, but we could not show the documents. We could show it, but we could not give it to the media because it belonged to a French entity, and we had no locus standi to distribute anything. So the French lawyer came to Malaysia to talk about the findings and the next steps in the judicial process. And what happened was he managed to give one big talk, and I think there were like thousands of people who attended the dinner and the talk. And there was so much excitement about the whole thing. So when he was on a domestic flight from Penang to Kuala Lumpur for the next talk, the immigration authorities actually walked into the plane and detained him and deported him. And then the news became so big and so beyond imagination of what I actually ever thought I would get myself into. Small trouble is okay, but not to this level, you know. So yeah, and then it just one thing after another. The authorities were so angry with us. They raided the office. They tried to take away our financial books, but they couldn't find anything to charge us because we didn't do anything wrong. And they were also a bit cautious because the French authorities were revealing the details of the secret negotiations and all. So they couldn't charge us for defamation or anything. But we were on national television every day as the bad people who were trying to bring down the government. And we were like, oh my God, what do we do, you know? So I don't think it was anything really planned, but it was just about integrity, I guess, doing the right thing. But perhaps looking back, I wouldn't regret anything, but I may probably have wanted to have a better strategy about how to reveal the information, because what we did was so raw, you know. We just had a press conference and got ourselves into trouble and all that. But
Let's talk about that a little bit, Cynthia. So I don't want to say that this experience was a whistleblower kind of event, but instigator to an investigation, maybe. But what, to that point, what if you would have to do this again, what would you do differently?
yeah, I think I would not regret the kind of life that evolved as what I call my adventurous life, and which was so exciting compared to all my colleagues and friends. But it came with a price as well.
Yeah.
One was really about security and personal risk,
Mhm.
because at that time, I think it was around 2013, 2014, that period, where social media was just getting there, you know. So I got quite a lot of threats online, Facebook and Twitter, but they started to threaten me about my family. And then that got me thinking about why am I doing all this? Because I certainly don't want my parents and my family to be involved in any of these things. And they knew where the vulnerable buttons were to press. So it wasn't so much about interrogation or investigation, was about personal safety. And I would have definitely wanted to take more precautions and make sure that there were no real security and reprisal to that level.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I would have done differently was to also maybe, as I said just now, do things with better strategy. But now that I'm much older, I think the only one regret is financial security, because as people were getting richer and my friends were getting more and more comfortable with their um, life in the commercial world, all that. At that time, it didn't matter. At that time, it was like, um, just like, why were they so preoccupied with savings and financial security? But as you get older, then you realize, there is a balance, and
Sure.
it might be important to actually look at future security issues as you get older and all that. But doing things differently, I think is something that I've learned to try and do in everything that I do. I always want to think about how we can have more impact, do things with a lot more, and
Mhm.
further put borders and the boundaries and see where the success can actually be better
Yeah.
experienced and stuff. So I think that's a personality trait that I've developed. But I would not regret anything, because I think it's made me a really much stronger person than when I was a child or when I was growing up. I mean, I'm strong now because there was no choice really when you were faced with this kind of adversity from the authorities. You never really know the kind of courage that was in you to face the consequences, if anything. So yeah.
What would you say the biggest
Sorry, that's clear
misconception
now.
of Cynthia, what would you say is the biggest misconception of a whistleblower?
So yeah, I learned the hard way that whistleblowers actually have no protection in Malaysia, and I learned even more that it was something of a phenomena almost everywhere. Um, and the irony of it was we had an act enacted here the minute the government signed on to the UNCAC. So one of the prerequisites was to actually protect persons who complain about corruption. So they formulated an act very quickly without public input, and there were many gaps in the law. For
Mhm.
example, you can only report to a law enforcement, but there are more and more law enforcement complicit to many of these transnational crimes and cross-border jurisdictions and all when it comes to customs, anti-corruption commission, police, etc. So the amendments now are taking place, and now I am regarded as somebody who knows a lot about the issue. So I'm actually invited into the government task force to provide input, etc. And when we set up C4, I again wanted to make sure it was named something that no one would forget, so it was named after that explosive that killed that Mongolian lady, and we don't have answers until today.
You told me that, and I thought you were just joking. So it is actually true that you named C4 after
Yeah,
this incident.
and many of the government people, including MECC personnel, and kept advising me, why don't you call it 4C? Because we thought about 4Cs that would make C4, clean, competent, all the different four C's. And then there was a fifth C, which was Cynthia, that started with a C too. So everybody was joking, it should be 5C, not C4. And the government people would tell me, actually, you should call it 4C. It sounds better. So I said, yeah, C4, I think easier to remember, and we laugh. But every time we went for government meetings, we were called to actually review bills, and so our standing in society became like really big, because we were doing, things differently, a lot louder than other anti-corruption groups. And we were doing it with a lot of facts. So we had a few investigative experts and accountants and auditors who were actually volunteering their time to read bank statements, see how the money was laundered and all that. So it was quite a impactful organization. So every time we go for a government meeting, they will say in Malay, C4 pun ada di sini. It's like, oh my God, even C4 has come for this meeting, in a joke, and then everybody will laugh, ha ha ha. So when I get to introduce myself, I will say, oh, I'm not carrying a bomb in my bag or anything. I'm just here for conversations around, say, the ombudsman bill or something, political finance and all. So it was like, yeah, so now no one forgets our name, and it was kind of like a gamble to actually get it out there that there's a corruption scandal that hasn't been resolved even until today, because of high power involved in the whole thing.
Right.
And then one MP happened, and it just grew so big in Malaysia that the governments every election were using anti-corruption reforms as part of their promises that when they win power, they will actually do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, but
Right.
when they win, they actually do all these things. Yeah, I mean, there are many stories to talk about, and I know the podcast has a short time. But one of the other things that got me curious was the private sector. And maybe this is why I also find it very interesting that we are friends, because you come from a different end of the spectrum and I come from this spectrum. Is the private sector is a very curious subject for me. It's not just about its profit making and all that I can actually see, but it's like how it exists in different political contexts, and how it still, manage to posture itself in a way that it can actually reach its targets and its goals, and many things that happen because of the private sector. But private sector is very hard to touch in countries like Malaysia. So when I heard about the Thai IOD and, all the successful work that you had done trying to get companies to come on board and to actually sign up and be committed to collective action to fight corruption, I was like, wow, this is really an interesting um, project, because it's a very difficult sector that will come in Malaysia, definitely, because we're also filled with ethnic differences and racial policies which seep into corporate life and everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess this podcast is more about you. So, and I appreciate you mentioning some of my work in the private sector. Unfortunately, Cynthia, we're out of time. I still have a couple of questions for you, but maybe we can have you back as a guest on the later episode. That's
In
okay with
another
you?
chapter.
But I really
Yeah.
appreciate the depth of information that you share, and your personal journey is amazing. And I can only think, I might just have a small percentage of bravery to do what you did. So thank you so much, and it's good to see you. And I hope we can have you back as a guest again.
Oh, thank you so much, Pada. It's good to talk to you again.
Thank you, Cynthia.